All right, I want to talk a bit about Moses because Moses is very important to American law because the United States operates on three premises. One, Roman government. Our government is Roman in style. Our philosophy is Greek, and our laws are Jewish. And so Moses is very important to the laws of America, the Mosaic Law. So let's look at Moses, because it's a very interesting history about the real story of Moses, the lawgiver. We know that Moses was given the law by God. He's the lawgiver and the leader of the children of Israel. And supposedly God gave Moses the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, and he comes down from Mount Sinai bringing to the children of Israel the new law. Actually the 10 Commandments also, of which Moses is supposed to have gotten from God, the 10 Commandments are actually based on the Egyptian negative confessions. Do some research at the library or on the web on the subject of Egyptian negative confessions. And you'll find that the Egyptian negative confessions was the laws in Egypt, and they're almost identical to the 10 Commandments. So that's probably where we get the 10 Commandments, is from Egypt. And here's just a classic example of the comparing the Egyptian negative confessions to the Hebrew laws from Moses. So the Mosaic Law. Moses, the lawgiver. All right, we have Moses, the lawgiver, in the legislative chambers of all across America and all the states. In the federal government, we have statues of Moses being the lawgiver. Not even mentioning, of course, the Vatican and all over the world. Moses is respected as the great lawgiver. Supreme Court, you see Moses holding the two laws, the tablets. Interesting too is that Moses, when first given the law from God, on the tablets, he threw them down and broke the tablets, so he was the first lawbreaker. This is where we get the idea that you break the law. As I said, here's Moses, the lawgiver, depicted in the U.S. House of Representatives. Why does Moses have horns? Now, I have some interesting questions about Moses. Let's start with his horns. A lot of people don't know that Moses was always pictured with horns. This is in the Vatican. In churches, you will always see Moses. Anytime he's portrayed, you'll see him with horns. Moses is pictured with the moon or lunar horns. Moses was the focal figure of an ancient cult of moon worship on the Sinai Peninsula. The horns represent the crescent moon. The moon in its lower quarter resembles horns. As this encyclopedia talks about, the lunar phase when the horns of the crescent moon point up at the angle. So the horns are actually the moon in the lower quarter. And we'll see the god of the moon. His name was Sin. We'll get to him in just a moment. You'll see the goddess is wearing the moon horns. Native Americans, of course, Native American chiefs wore horns. This is why they would count their days. Native Americans would count their days from sundown to sundown. That's why they would always keep track of their days by many moons. They would not say many suns, but by many moons. So the horns of the Native American Indian chiefs were the lunar horns of many moons. And of course the Vikings kept the same identical idea. The Vikings had the moon horns. And it was, as I said, the lower quarter of the moon was in the shape of horns. And so, establishing that the lower quarter of the moon are the horns, now we get into the actual archaeological findings. We see the moon being pictured on coins. Here's hands raised worshiping the moon. These are ancient findings in archaeology. Here's the moon on its boat as it floats through the sky in the ancient Egyptian idea. Here's the Virgo, the Virgin, the constellation of Virgo, connected to the lower quarter of the moon. The moon god above the three in the middle. So the lower quarter of the moon has taken on the appearance of horns. And here you'll see the same thing in the Vatican. The Vatican, lower quarter of the moon. The moon cults. I'm not going to bother to read all of this because you can read it yourself, but it basically is talking about an ancient cult of the moon. And, of course, in Islam, Allah is connected to the moon cult. Now, if you go to the Google, for instance, if you go to Google and type in moon god Sin, because the actual name of the old Arabian moon god his name was Sin, S-I-N. Sin was the Semitic moon god's name. So as I said, if you go to Google and just type in moon god Sin, S-I-N, you'll see there's over 1 million entries just on that one subject. Then if you put into Google, say S-I-N equals Allah, you'll get about 1,270,000 entries talking about the moon god Allah. And here's another one. This one's like 3.25 million if you put in moon god Allah. So Allah, or Sin, S-I-N, was a moon god in ancient Arabia. Here's another one. If you put in Islamic moon god, you get 198,000 entries. Here the Catholic Church even uses the crescent moon. As I said, the moon god's name was Sin. Sin, the moon god, was a god chiefly venerated in the pre-Christian civilization in southern Arabia. It is significant. The lower part of this paragraph, it says, it is significant that the Semites of the great caravan city of Palmyra in the first 3 centuries of the Christian era also gave high priority to the worship of the moon. And there again we see that the moon god's name is Sin. Now, one dictionary, or actually it's an encyclopedia on symbols, talks about the moon god Sin. It says, if Moses climbed Mount Sinai to meet the resident god, then the god he met would have been the moon god Sin, who had been enthroned on that mountain since the rise of Sumeria, and gave his name to it. In fact, Sin gave his name to the whole Sinai Peninsula, formerly the land of Sinim. So originally, Yahweh was not only a form of the primitive lunar deity of Arabia. So Yahweh, the god of the ancient Hebrews, is actually the old god of the mountain, Sin, the moon god. It says, in Babylon, homage was paid above all to the moon god, the supreme guarantor of cosmic order. So we see this, here's another one, another cuneiform picture from the ancient Sumerian showing the god Sin receives the homage of 2 of his worshippers. You'll see the moon in the lower quarter, and that's the moon god Sin. And as I said in the ancient Arabian, system of moon worship, a mountain was Ai. So you take the mountain Ai and connect it to the god Sin, it becomes Sin Ai, or Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is simply the moon god Sin and his mountain, which is spelled Ai. Worship of the moon god. So, we see that originally Yahweh, the last sentences in yellow says the original Yahweh was only another form of this primitive lunar deity of Arabia. So that's why today in America we spell synagogue S-Y-N, but originally the correct spelling is S-I-N, not S-Y-N. That's why if you go to Israel and going to a Jewish synagogue, it's spelled S-I-N, because it's the worship of the moon god, Sin, the house of the god Sin. Here's a synagogue in Israel. Zoom in on it, it's spelled S-I-N, not S-Y-N. So you'll find all over the world, except in America, all over the world, synagogues that spell S-I-N in honor of the god that they're worshiping, the moon god Sin. Here's an article, Traces of Worship of the Moon God Sin Among the Early Israelites. So we see that in the Jewish tradition, it's always used the symbolism of the moon, even on their sacred or blessed symbols, amulets. You will see the worship, their hands raised, worshiping the moon. So the phases of the moon were very important in the ancient Phoenician, Canaanite, Hebrew tradition. Here you see the priest lighting a fire to the signal for the new moon. Moon worship was very important in the ancient Israel and the ancient Hebrew. Even during the Middle Ages, we see the Jewish cycle of the moon being celebrated. Lots and lots of material and pictures on the worship by the Hebrews of the moon god Sin. Above you'll see a carving, blessing of the new moon. So in Sinai, as I said, was a large and very high mountain range in the middle of Sinai. And from the east, you could look east and you would see the moon coming up and over that mountains. And so the ancient peoples believed that the moon lived in the mountain, and the moon god's name was Sin, and the mountain was spelled Ai. Put the two together, it becomes Mount Sinai. So that's who Moses would have been going up to see when he went up into the mountain to get the law. He would have been going up to see the moon god Sin. As a matter of fact, it's called Sin Ai or Sinai. So, the moon god Sin. That's the first part of the real story of Moses. Moses was the leader of the lunar cult, worshippers of the moon god Sin. A mountain in the ancient language was Ai. Put the two together, and it becomes Mount Sinai. Go back to Google again and just put Moses, the moon deity. And you'll find there's 318,000 entries talking about Moses and Mount Sinai. Moses and moon worship. Sinai moon worship. Moses and the volcano god. No. Moses and the volcano god. Now, we've seen Moses connected to moon worship, the moon god Sin, Ai. Now we're looking at Moses, another feature of Moses that a lot of people don't know anything about, and that is Moses was also connected to volcano worship. So we have the moon, and now we have volcanoes. Volcanoes themselves were very powerful symbols in the ancient world. They still frighten people today. On the volcano, in this particular encyclopedia of symbols, says, like any other impressive and fearful aspect of nature, volcanoes have been the object of worship for human beings from the earliest Stone Age. So volcanoes have always been symbols of worship. And again, yet the original Yahweh seems to have begun as a volcano god also. Mount Sinai, where Moses encountered him, was the seat of the Midianite god, who had formerly dwelt in a volcano. So we're seeing that Moses, when he encounters Yahweh on Mount Sinai, along with being a moon god, we also see that Moses was involved in volcano worship. And even books today talking about Mount Sinai show mountains on fire. The only time you see a mountain on fire is a volcano. Even one book is called The Mountain of Fire. Moses took stones. Here we have a picture of Moses with the stone tablets. And that looks to me to be a volcano behind him. Does it look like a volcano to you? This is from Hebrew and Jewish books for children. Bible pictures. Moses in front of a volcano. Here we have Mount Sinai. Jehovah performed signs for the Hebrews. Does that look like a volcano to you? There's another one with the children of Israel camped at Mount Sinai, where Jehovah or Yahweh was the volcano god. There's another picture of the volcano in eruption. And so we got plenty of pictures of this throughout religious literature. You'll always see Moses in a volcano. So does that look like a volcano to you? Here's one Hebrew telling another one to look at the volcano. Volcanoes, of course, had lightning associated with them. Israel and Mount Sinai dedicated itself to Jehovah. So here are the Hebrews worshiping the volcano god that Moses was going up to see. Here's Moses up in the volcano. Here's another picture of the children of Israel running away from God because he was scaring them. Of course, I would be scared too if you were that close to a volcano. So we have pictures, like I said, we have many, many pictures of Moses in connection with the volcano worship. Here's another one. Jehovah led the sons of Israel to the mountain named Sinai. Does that look like a volcano to you? So we know that Moses and the story of Moses also dealt with volcano worship. That is history. We also know that Moses had other sides to him too. Now here in the Jewish encyclopedia, the symbols for the different holy days, and in the lower right hand you will see the feast of the giving of the law. So here we have the feast of the giving of the law, which also coincides with the first fruits. And does that appear to be a volcano to you? Looks like a volcano to me, and it also has lightning, as you will see, has lightning all around it. And of course, like I said, that's typical because the lightning does accompany volcanoes. Now this is taken from a Hebrew reference work on the symbols of the holy days. And here is the symbol for the feast of the giving of the law to Moses. That appears to be, to me, a volcano with lightning strikes all around it. The word volcano comes from the Latin volcano god Vulcan, or Vulcanus. It's derived from an old Cretan deity named Vulcanus. Here's Vulcanus, or Vulcan, the volcano god, holding in his hands the lightning and the hammer of Thor. So with the hammer and the lightning bolts, the old ancient volcano god Vulcan frightened the whole world. He was the god of the mountain. Prometheus was also a volcano god whose worshippers took him to Greece, while Yahweh, the Hebrew god, was also a volcano god whose worshippers took him to Judah. So Prometheus, Yahweh, all of these were ancient gods of the volcano. Tribes living on the slopes of the fallout area of an active volcano promoted the smoking home to the status of a tribal goddess and regularly threw their captive enemies into the lava-filled lava in the hope of dissuading her from erupting over them. One such volcano in Anatolia was Mount Yahweh, whose worshippers were the Jews. We find that Mount Yahweh was changed to Mount Yahweh. His worshippers took the volcano god with them when they invaded Babylonians and drove them out of Anatolia and into Phoenicia. So, again, just to reiterate, yet the original Yahweh, the ancient Hebrew god Yahweh, seems to have begun as a volcano god. Here we have God, Yahweh, on the fiery mountain with lightning all around, chiseling out the 10 Commandments for Moses. And this is God with his hammer, and you'll see the mountains on fire with lightning, just like Volcanus, or Vulcan, the volcano god. One and the same thing. So Moses was going up to a volcano to get the law. So we're talking about the law of the volcano god Vulcan. He was also identified with the local moon god Sin, as we said before, the moon god worship, after whom the mount was named. But then in Exodus 13 it says, the appearance of Yahweh was as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So in the book of Exodus, we are told that Yahweh always appeared to his people, Israel, as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And so here it is in the book of Exodus. We read, and the Lord went before them, Israel, by day in a pillar of cloud. This is from the Bible in the book of Exodus. To lead them the way. And by night a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night, from before the people. So the pillar of cloud by day, obviously a volcano. Pillar of cloud by day is a volcano. Pillar of fire by night is a volcano. So we read that and other reference works in the Bible, says the magnificence of Yahweh was like a devouring fire on top of the mountain. And the people said, we heard his orders from the middle of the flames. So right down to the Babylonian captivity, Yahweh remained primarily a volcano god. And in Psalms it says, I called upon Yahweh and cried out to my Allah, and heard my voice in his temple, and the land shook and trembled. So we see that Moses was dealing with, when he went up into the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, the volcano god Vulcan. And here are just some scriptures showing the same thing. How the noise thereof from God showed concerning the cattle, also concerning the vapor. The noise thereof telleth. We feel his presence in the thunder. There's all kinds of scriptures in the Old Testament talking about, they heard, like on 37:2, hear attentively the noise of his voice, and the sound goeth out of his mouth. The bottom, number 4, it says, and after it a voice roared, he thundered with his voice of his excellence. God thunders marvelously with his voice. So I'm just showing that there are many different scriptures that talk about God speaking to his people in thunder. God thunders marvelously with his voice. And here again in Job 37, it says, the storm, the clouds, God's tent, gathered as the thunder or the voice of Yahweh roars. They descend and God shoots the arrows of his lightning or thunderbolts. God thunders wonderfully with his voice. All of these references in the Bible are talking about the God of the mountains. Mount Sinai was also a volcano god who thunders wonderfully with his voice. So the voice of God is thunder. And of course we know Zeus was always pictured with lightning bolts, and that's the way Yahweh was pictured. So interesting that God in the English transliteration of the Latin word Deus. Deus is an alternate spelling of the Greek word Zeus. So when you use the word God in the English, it comes from a Latin word Deus. Just understand, God comes from the Latin word Deus, and Deus is an alternate spelling of the Greek god Zeus. Deus, Zeus. God is Zeus, the god of thunder and lightning. From all kinds of reference work, you can see that our word God comes from Zeus. So there is Zeus with the thunderbolts. Here again is another Bible reference work saying, thunder is called Koloth of voices, for it is considered the voice of God. So when the ancient people saw lightning and thunder on a mountain, it was burning with fire, they were frightened because God was talking to them. Actually, no, it was just a volcano. Moses and the volcano god Vulcan. And of course, that's what you get with a volcano, is a lot of lightning and thunder. And I can see why it would have frightened people. Lightning can be symbolized by means of an arrow. So much for Moses and the volcano god Vulcan. Oh, and one more point about Moses and the volcano god. Vulcan, the volcano god, there's a symbol in the ancient Hebrew that's still used today. Mr. Spock, as you will recall, here we have Vulcan. Mr. Spock is a Vulcan. And that hand symbol is used in Hebrew religion today. It's a very interesting symbol. And why would Mr. Spock be using a Hebrew symbol and calling himself a Vulcan? Because this is a Vulcan symbol. Here we have, just very quickly go through this, you will see this symbol used in Hebrew literature everywhere. It's called the benediction symbol, the blessing symbol. So the rabbis will bless the congregation after the service with this hand sign. Here's a Pentateuch scroll crown with the hands raised in the priestly blessing. Here we see the Lord is high, and he looks upon the lowly. And you'll see the Hebrew priest giving the blessing. Here in a synagogue in downtown Los Angeles, you will see the prophet giving the blessing in the Hebrew hand sign. Here's a good picture of a rabbi, and the service is closed with the blessing or the benediction symbol. The same symbol that Mr. Spock, the Vulcan, uses. Because Hebrew religion is also based on the worship of the old volcano god at Sinai, Sin-Ai, the moon god, the volcano god, the Vulcan. But where does this hand sign come from? Comes from the split hoof of a goat. The split hoof of a goat is also connected in the most ancient world with Hinduism and with the worship of Vulcan, the volcano god. The split hoof of a goat is used in the Hebrew religion. That's where it comes from. All of this is very, very involved, but I'm just giving you the basic concepts for which you can go and do your own research on where these symbols and words have come from. The goat god. We also have the worship of the goat god, Baphomet. And here is an interesting point too, is that the goat god, or Vulcan, the goat god is being worshipped here, as you can see. Even in the Bible it has the man riding the goat, which is a familiar Masonic symbol too. Here in the tarot cards, we see that the devil is representing as giving as the devil giving the symbol, the hand sign of the goat god. So we've looked at Moses as the leader of the ancient lunar or moon cult of Sinai. Again, the god of the moon, his name was Sin, and a mountain was Ai. Put them together to become Mount Sinai, the moon god, the home of the lunar moon god. But it's also, Mount Sinai was connected, as we saw, to volcano worship also. Next we saw Moses as the leader of the ancient volcano cult. Then we saw the volcano god's son Vulcan, still with us today on TV. Let's examine another side of Moses before we leave him. Moses and mushrooms. Moses, we're told in the book of Genesis and in the Pentateuch, led the children of Israel out into the wilderness, and they were fed each day with something called manna from heaven. We have pictures of the Hebrews collecting manna from heaven. And the manna from heaven they would pick up in the morning. We're told that manna is actually, the word manna in Hebrew means, what is it? It's because obviously the children of Israel didn't know what it was. But the Bible reference work says whatever it was small, round, flaky, is white, and obviously came from heaven. So the manna from heaven, the word manna meant what is it? And whatever it was small, round, flaky, and white. Here they are picking the manna from heaven off the ground. And we're told that the children of Israel would eat the manna. Here it is even in Exodus 16. And the account in the Bible says, and when the dew that lay on the ground was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there was lay a small round thing, small as hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, it is manna, for they did not know what it was. And so Moses said unto them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. And across in the reference work it says, it is manna, simply meaning, what is it? For they knew not what it was. Well, it's very simple. What manna from heaven actually was small round things picked up in the morning dew. We have many, many pictures of this taking place. Small round things being picked up in the morning dew. Even in the ancient and medieval world, they showed Jews picking them small round things in the morning dew. What would that be if it wasn't? Manna from heaven was in fact a small round thing, mushrooms. When the dew that lay on the ground was gone up, well, that's when mushrooms usually form on the ground, as small round things in the morning dew. So what we're talking about here is mushrooms. Here's a bunch of mushrooms. This is the Amanita muscaria, the very famous mushroom, hallucinogenic mushroom. Andrei Paharek, in his book, The Sacred Mushroom, The Door, Key to the Door of Eternity, the search for the secret plant of the ancients used to send the mind to another world and into the future. Here we see, even in the ancient Egyptians, you will see the gods, and in India also, the gods using the mushroom. Soma, the divine mushroom of immortality. The word soma simply means, the history of magic mushroom is known the world over. Again, it was called the food of the gods. We have many, many books talking about the magic mushroom in relation to the ancient Hebrew and the ancient Christian congregations. The mystery of the manna. Manna was the mushrooms. The small round things in the morning dew. Many, many books, many reference works on this subject of the plant of the gods, the food of the gods. Here's some articles written in Israel. There's quite a few articles that have been written in papers and magazines in Israel talking about Moses actually on psychedelic drugs and leading the people to those sacred mushrooms. This is from a newspaper article. Hebrew University researcher says Moses was tripping at Mount Sinai, showing that even in Israel they're publishing articles about when you start doing your research and really looking into what the story of Moses is all about. It's about a moon cult. It's about a volcano cult. It's about hallucinogenic mushrooms. Here's another one talking about Moses. So, Moses was not the only one on mushrooms, though. Adam and Eve, being the first two couple, beat him to it. Even as far back as in the Bible in Genesis 1, talks about Adam and Eve. Well, here Adam and Eve is pictured in a church in France with the tree of knowledge being mushroom, a big mushrooms. Christian fresco showing Amanita muscaria as a tree of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. So a lot of people do not know that all around Europe and in the Middle East, Adam and Eve are pictured getting their wisdom and knowledge from the tree of good and evil, which is actually a mushroom. Here it is in a church, Adam and Eve with the mushrooms. All kinds of pictures on this, but this kind of knowledge is not given to Christians or Jews. But if you want to do some homework, you'll find that Moses was, and the story of the manna from heaven goes back to the sacred mushroom. Here's pictures of Adam and Eve taking pieces of the mushroom from the snake in the Garden of Eden. And there you'll see the Amanita muscaria mushroom as a backdrop to Adam and Eve. These pictures are replete throughout the ancient world and the European churches, religious institutions. All of these people know that the mushroom was part of the story. And there you'll see mushrooms in the middle. And here's Jesus on one side, and there's some of his followers on mushrooms. Here's God giving mushrooms. Well, that was in the ancient Old Testament times. So all of this mushroom use was in the Old Testament. Well, what about today, modern day? Let's look at the Christian church today. There are books like The Holy Mushroom, Evidence of Mushrooms in Judeo-Christianity. John Allegro, one of the three top men in the deciphering of the Dead Sea Scrolls. John Allegro wrote a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross was a study of the nature and origins of Christianity within the fertility cults of the ancient Near East. Fertility cults? Yep. Fertility cults. And here's some beautiful Middle Ages paintings of Jesus. And here you'll see Jesus presiding over mushrooms. Giving his followers mushrooms. And it says in Matthew 26:26 in the Bible, it says, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it and gave it to the disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. Interesting that the word body, take and eat, this is my body, Jesus said. The word body, here it is again in the King James Version. Matthew 26:26 says, and as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, take, eat, this is my body. Well, the point being is that the word body is a word soma, and soma means mushroom. So in a Bible dictionary, look at the word soma, and it will say it's body, which means a mushroom. So here we have Jesus feeding his apostles mushrooms. Here's in the Middle Ages, in the medieval church, you'll see the mushroom around the saint. Here's a mushroom table, the Amanita muscara table of mushrooms. Modern day paintings of Jesus dying on a mushroom. Christmas is Jesus' birthday, so naturally the symbol of the mushroom will match. So all over the world, in Christmas, and especially in Russia, the mushroom is used as a symbol in Christmas. Santa Claus on the mushroom. Mushroom symbols. Always the red with the white polka dot, which is Amanita muscara for Christmas. It's quite literally everywhere, but most people don't see these things. They're not looking for them. But mushroom use by the early Christians was replete all over the world, and the ancient history testifies to it. So much for the mushrooms of Christmas. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year with a Amanita muscara mushroom. So in conclusion, we see that Moses, leading his people, the children of Israel, fed them with manna from heaven. The manna from heaven that they were picking from the ground every morning was a mushroom. With this knowledge, we can see the logic of the headdress of the ancient Hebrew priest. In the ancient world, the priest, different priests, not only Hebrews, wore mushroom headdresses. Here, the Jewish priests with the mushroom cap to symbolize the importance of the magic hallucinogenic mushroom in their rituals. Mushroom headdresses for Jewish high priests are in the Middle East. Kings, potentates, and high priests always had mushroom headdresses. So much for that. Looks like a mushroom upside down on that priest's head. Here's mushroom worshippers for Jesus. And here's a mushroom head. He looks like he's been on it for some time, too. Look at these goofballs with their mushroom headdress, and they're so profoundly ignorant, they have no idea in the world what they're wearing. They're wearing mushrooms on their head. So that should tell you something about their philosophy of life. And of course, typical of the world we live in, people will go and kiss the ring of the mushroom head. thinking it's something holy. Here's a bunch of mushrooms. Here's another bunch of mushrooms. Mushroom worship in the Christian church today is replete everywhere. There's a bunch of mushroom heads there. So, time to say goodbye to all the mushroom heads. Yeah, that's right. Even the cooks and chefs wear the mushroom symbol for the food of the gods. Here's the high priest with his mushroom cap. The Bible is filled with mushroom worship. So much for the law of Moses. I guess that's it. So now you know a little bit more about Moses, the moon-worshipping prophet of the moon god's sin, or leading his people to worship the volcano god Vulcan, and feeding his people with mushrooms. So much for the law.